All right, happy Sunday night, happy Valentine's Day night, and happy beginning of another week. I am so thrilled to be joined by my good friend Chris. Welcome, Chris. How you doing, brother?
Doing really well. How about yourself?
Good, good. The first thing we got to talk about is we almost always have three folks on this show. My good friend Kyle Walton is almost always on representing the libertarian point of view. Tonight, though, he's not going to be here. He is recovering from COVID. We heard a few days ago that he tested positive, unfortunately, for COVID. He's got some pretty severe symptoms that he's working through. Seems like he's doing a little bit better. Last I heard from him yesterday, but we wish him well. So thoughts and prayers for him. Look forward to having him back here in a week or two. But in the meantime, it's you and me, Chris. So this is going to be a fun debate. We get to go head to head on this. We've got a lot of topics to talk about. But given that it is Valentine's, I want to hear what you did because I know you got a lady there that you've been taking care of. So what'd you end up doing for her for Valentine's Day?
I thought she was the one who takes care of me, but
Oh, maybe that's it.
anyway, no, we went to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and did a little bit of outdoor dining. They had like this tent set up.
Yeah.
It was still a little bit like too. It felt indoors because I don't know if you've seen a lot of those like tent setups that like they tell you it's outside, but at the same time you feel like very covered. So I was
Yeah.
a little anxious about that, but we still had a really nice time. Good food as always, excellent service. There was a waiter there who came up to us and
Yeah.
acted like he knew us and like was asking about our skincare regimen. So that was really weird because we did not know him. And I was certain he was somebody that my wife knew because she was acting like she knew him really well. And then he walked away. I was like, "Who was that?" And she's like, "I have no idea." So we're thinking maybe he mistook us for somebody else. So that was fun.
See, that just goes to show you how different California is from the South where I live. Because in the South, that's like every day. People come up to you, they don't know you, they immediately engage you in conversation, stuff like that. May have a mask, may not, like who knows? And
Yeah.
it is so different because Florida, at least where I live, is very like much opened up and going back to normal and all these things as people are getting the vaccine and stuff. We're kind of rushing back. I mean, we did close down a little bit at times, and I've talked about it on the show, but we're very quick to get back to a sense of normal, schools being reopened, those type of things. And now it feels like that's on overdrive. So, but people are still getting it. My family and I, we had COVID over Christmas, and then of course Kyle's got it, which we were just talking about. So it's kind of an interesting, dynamic. Like, have you been vaccinated? Have you not? Like, I don't know. Like, are you over it? That type of thing. But by and large, it's been mostly a normal Valentine's Day. Got my wife some flowers, went out to eat, and all that stuff. So it's been good, but I'm glad. I'm glad you did it right. So, and Ruth's Chris is a great place. I used to wait tables at one years ago, so I know they got some good food. Yeah, so
Okay.
that's awesome. So, what we get to do tonight, though, is because it's you and me, I thought we could do kind of some rapid fire on some different topics. And there's so much going on. There's so much going on. I'm so grateful we have this chance to be able to talk through stuff, get your perspective, and I'll do my best to be able to give the conservative perspective on a host of issues. So I feel like we have to talk about Gina Carano from The Mandalorian, Star Wars, who was just booted off the show. There's so much outrage about this, about her, being taken off the show for what she's put out on social media. So I'm going to get your thoughts on that. We need to talk about Nikki Haley because she's been in the news. She's made some pretty vocal comments about Trump that really shows that divide that we've been talking about for the past several weeks on the show. So I want to post those up there along with some comments by people who follow our channels. And then we have to talk about impeachment. I did a whole show on this on Wednesday about my thoughts, but now that it's ultimately been resolved, at least in the Senate, we need to talk about that and where we go from here. So let's get into it, man. The first one with Gina is I'm bringing up the post that she made that it was the source of so much controversy, and I'll read it to you. Is that she was talking about Jews during World War II and the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And she said that Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. And then she goes on to say that because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? So I've got a lot of thoughts about this, but I want to hear yours first, Chris. So from a liberal standpoint, Do you agree with her being fired? Do you find these comments to be outrageous? And what do you think that America's reaction should be to this situation?
I do find the comments in that post very offensive. I don't think that being either a conservative or a liberal is anything like being a Jew in Nazi Germany today. I don't think that this by itself would have been justification enough to fire Gina Carano. I do think that this was kind of the result of a pattern that she's been showing on social media for several months. We've seen her clash with Pedro Pascal, whose sister just came out as a transgender woman, on social media, where they've had arguments about what the point is of putting pronouns in your bio. And she's engaged in some COVID denialism. There was another post that was accused of anti-Semitism. It involved a bunch of like wealthy banker types sitting around this like game board that
Yeah.
was perched on the backs of people made to look like slaves, and it just invoked a lot of various anti-Semitic tropes about like Jews running the world. I don't think she necessarily intended that or even knew the meaning of it, but it's just part of the pattern that I think Disney had a problem with. And I'm disappointed because I was really happy when I first heard of Gina Carano's casting. I really liked that she was, this badass female fighter who didn't, weigh like 130 pounds, like most of the action women that we see in sci-fi. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there was just a little bit of body diversity, and it was cool. But I do think that she just created a problem for Disney that they wanted to make go away.
Well, I mean, it's a powerful show, right? I mean, people love it. It's kind of redeeming Star Wars in so many people's eyes. And she's been a great, actress, and she's been on, Marvel stuff as well, and a lot of fame, from her fighter days. Just an all-around fascinating person. And I guess, when I look at this, post, and we could, possibly talk through some of the others. To some extent, I think I kind of get where she's coming from, because you think about Nazi Germany, and there's so much history that happened there. There's so many different points of view to try to understand the awful, awful nature of where the Nazis came from. I remember learning about that history, and one of the things that was so horrible and shocking is how when they interviewed, and put on trial Nazi generals and things like that, the trials that happened after the war, so many Nazis had normalized what they were doing. And they were just like, oh, I was just following the rules. It was just the government bureaucracy, and I was doing what I was told. And it's like, how can you say that when you were killing massive amounts of people, millions and millions of people? Oh, I was just following orders. That's what I was supposed to be doing. And there was this dereliction of their conscience. And I think like that happens all the time. Today is that people feel no sense of responsibility to their fellow man. They feel no sense of shared ownership, of our country and the state that it's in. And I would love to see more. I don't know if that's where she was going from with this tweet, but I just got to wonder, what standard is Disney creating whenever your social media post gets you fired like this? I mean, how many times have people posted comparing Trump to Hitler or whatever politician they don't like to the scum of the earth? I mean, we live in this hyperbolic age where people all over the place are posting all kinds of outrageous things. And at what point should that affect your job? And can Disney abide by that? Is that the image they want to create? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not necessarily a new standard. I think people's public comments and actors' public comments, athletes' public comments have always been considered grounds for letting them go. Studios have had morality clauses for as long as studios have been around. So I don't necessarily think it's anything new. To go back to the comparison itself, yes, there's a lot of political division in society at the moment, but we're coming off of a fairly lengthy period where conservatives had control of all three branches of governments in our country. And it's worth noting that period of time coincided with a rise in actual Nazism, with a rise in white nationalist movements. So I think the comparison just remains over the line. Like I said, I'm sad to see her go, but she was somebody who it looked like there may have even been spin-offs planned around her. If you look at her character arc in the second season, and I think she just really tanked it. So yes, it's sad to see this kind of thing happen, but I think that she's got to take some responsibility for blowing this herself.
Well, I think where we're headed is we're starting to get to a point where there's a conservative entertainment and there's a liberal entertainment, and we're increasingly, desperate in terms of where we go for our entertainment. I mean, I got to tell you, man, I could not stand The Last Jedi. I thought it was terrible, and maybe it was just because it was a bad movie. I don't know if that's politics or not, but there are certain movies that appeal to me. I mean, we've talked about Cobra Kai. I think we both agree on that one. But
Mhm.
Gina's going to get other opportunities. I've heard that she's working with the Daily Wire, so she's got this other future that she's creating for herself that conservatives are going to love. But how, like, at what point does this become even more and more of a danger? Because now if we're getting our news from different sources, our politics from different sources, and now our entertainment from different sources, I mean, we are really creating two different worlds. And what a shame that is. So, if you're in a place where you follow liberal talking points, you keep your job. But if you follow conservative ones, or you have a different outline view, then you can't be part of it. That's just not the type of tolerance. And I guess, Chris, I mean, this is my accusation for the left. And I mean, there's numerous different liberals, not just conservatives like me, who have brought this up. But it seems like we are moving away from a respect for the freedom of speech. You think about like Berkeley in California, where you live, and how many times have they shut speakers down simply because of their views, to the point that, Bill Maher is like, what has happened to us? I mean, is the left tolerant of those who disagree with him? And you can make the same argument that conservatives struggle with that from time to time, but it just doesn't seem like we're moving in the right direction when things like this occur. If this was happening on the opposite end of the spectrum, where someone, who was a liberal was saying awful, terrible things about Trump, I wouldn't support a company for firing him. I don't think that would be appropriate at all. Now, if they bring it to the set, if they're not doing their job well, if they're spending all their star power on this, and they're a terrible actor, actress, and the show's tanking as a result, okay. But if she's doing a great job with the show, then
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense. So I don't know. Maybe there was more behind the scenes. Maybe she was like, fighting the other actors or something like that, or they were bringing it onto the set. That would help me understand a little bit more. But it just seems like what you do in your private life, if it's not affecting your job and your ability to do it, what's the issue? So that's where I stand on this one. But let's talk about Nikki Haley, because bringing up what's going on with her recently is equally shocking to me. Talking about some comments that are just fascinating, is that she made the news, and I posted this on our page a couple days ago in terms of her perspective on Trump. And I was shocked by this. So she did an interview with Politico, and she said, "We need to acknowledge that Trump let us down. He went down a path he shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have followed him, and we shouldn't have listened to him, and we can't ever let that happen again." And I got to tell you, man, I was shocked by these comments, because, I mean, she was his ambassador to the UN, supporter of his from time to time, obviously not in the primaries, but eventually she supported him over Clinton. And here's a couple comments from our followers. I mean, we got, probably a dozen or more people talking about how they were shocked by this, and some of them enraged. So Kathy said, "I'm tired of the constant emphasis on personality instead of policy. Does she have any policy positions of her own?" And Wendy said she screwed up her chances of winning a 2024 primary run. And I got to think, that's exactly what I thought about immediately is, Nikki Haley was somebody that I really thought would be competitive in the next elections, given her service as a governor, in South Carolina, her service at the UN, and how many people in the Trump camp thought well of her. And now look, now look at where she's. It's shocking to me. What do you make of this as somebody outside the conservative movement? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right that she at one point looked like she would be very competitive for 2024. I was someone who respected her a lot prior to 2016. She was very critical of Trump during the primaries. And in response, she was faced with a lot of hatred and racist attacks given her Indian heritage. I remember Ann Coulter famously tweeted, "Trump should deport Nikki Haley." But then, she kind of signed on and got on board and started taking like photo opportunities with Diamond and Silk and promoting Trump and campaigning for him and even defending some of his worst excesses. So she kind of strikes me as like a Dan Crenshaw like figure, where she's someone who was very respectable, very much someone who wants to be seen as a unifier and a moderate, but at the same time wants to appeal to the Trump base. And so she's like playing hokey pokey, 1 foot in, 1 foot out all the time. I'm not shocked by these comments at all because she's flip flopped on Trump and Trumpism so many times over the last 5 years. And this is just her pointing her finger in the wind and deciding which way it's blowing.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me is that she's lost that, right? Like, no more tiptoeing. I mean, this is not a tiptoeing comment at all. This is like an affront to everyone who is a diehard supporter of Trump, and I mean, even people who just voted for him. There's still an overwhelming sense within the conservative movement that Trump did a lot of good things, and that needs to be wrestled with. And frankly, that's where I stand. Is I see many things that he did that I agree with, many things that he did that I don't agree with. But to go to this point that he took us down a path we shouldn't have followed him at any point, and we shouldn't have listened to him at all. I mean, that's pretty bold moves, and that's no longer tiptoeing. That's taking a stand against him. And I just think that's absolutely surprising because just like one of our commenters was saying, I mean, good luck winning a national election with that kind of stance, because, and this is the thing, is that some people see Trump as a person. He was a leader who represented, certain ideals. I think it was more than that. I have said so many times on this show and in posts and things that Trump dialed into something much bigger than himself. I mean, people barely cared about him before this. Sure, they watched The Apprentice, whatever. He's a businessman in New York. But he dialed into something that was massive. It's the same thing that Sarah Palin dialed into and many others before, which is this notion of an entire class of people who feel disrespected, who feel like they're not heard, who feel like they are talked down to, who feel like the government isn't responsive to what they want it to be, and they want to see some level of strong change. And when Trump governed from the far right, for many people, it was the first time they felt that kind of trust and consistency in their lifetime. And you can say that it was extreme, that he backed down at times, fine. But that's still a huge voice in American politics that was given an audience with Trump, and then he became the epitome of that. And he still is to a large degree. So out of respect for those people, maybe you agree, you disagree at times, but to get to this point where you ostracize him, I mean, that's fascinating. That to me is the divide. I mean, it's here now as you go from this lady who was in his administration to now polar opposites, it seems, as you have this side of Nikki Haley, who is representing one conservative, one aspect of the conservative movement, and then Trump is still around. We're going to talk about impeachment next, but he is still around, and he very possibly could run again himself in 2024, or Mike Pence could. And so is there any reconciliation, or is our movement going to be divided? And, where I see it going, to be honest, is you look at the Democrats and how you had Bernie Sanders, who represented the more socialistic, extreme left views, and then you had Biden, who at least ran on a more moderate policy. We'll see how he actually governs. That's a whole other topic. But there was these two different factions, and ultimately they reconciled under Biden, and were able to put him to the top. I don't see that happening with Nikki Haley, to be honest. Not with comments like this. Not this early, and not based upon how impeachment played out. So that's something we're going to talk about. I'm definitely going to do a podcast on it. I think this next Wednesday, to be able to really get in detail to the conservative movement. And if we have this type of divide, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that leads to potentially a split in the party. I mean, you really could have that, because if that's where she stands, the Trump influence is still very, very strong. And
yeah, I know. There was a time when we thought it was impossible to reconcile the Ted Cruz wing of the Republican Party with the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party. I mean, those two men said things about each other that go way beyond this. And now Ted Cruz is so pro-Trump, he makes Lindsey Graham look like, a moderate squish.
Right.
So we'll see if this really creates the divide that it should, frankly, because I think they are two irreconcilable divisions within the Republican Party. But we've seen Nikki Haley change her mind before, and I'm really not completely sold on the idea that she won't change her mind again.
I just I have trouble with those comments, to be honest with you. Is there's so many things that I struggle with when it came to Trump in terms of how he talked to people, comments that he made, how he used his Twitter. But at the same time, there are also many things that I can appreciate. I mean, the fact that he won the presidency. I mean, he brought Republicans into power. He appointed numerous, judges in federal courts that I agree with on the Supreme Court, especially with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. I mean, uh, it's there's many things that he did that you can find common ground as a conservative. Maybe as a liberal, you probably hate it, but for me, I can find many good things that he did that I support. Foreign policy is another one. I mean, people thought that he was going to invade Iran. They thought that we were going to go to war with North Korea. They thought that he was going to, have us in all kinds of entanglements. That's not what happened. I
Mhm.
love the way that he handled Iran and so many different foreign entanglements that he was able to kind of work our way out of. Doesn't mean it was perfect, but it wasn't this apocalyptic outcome that so many people said it was going to be. It was very responsible, especially when you look at the Bush years and others where we invested billions of dollars into struggles and wars that really didn't turn out the way that the neoconservatives thought. So, I mean, there are good things that he did to get to this point where you say that we shouldn't have listened to him at all. Like there was a voice there that needed to be heard. And even if you disagree with many Trump supporters, there's still citizens too who have a voice that at least was given a place in American politics, and we have to wrestle with that. We have to wrestle with that. And so many politicians simply just go wherever the wind takes them. And Trump at least stuck by what he said. He really governed in many ways the same way he campaigned. And that itself is something interesting and worthy of note. So I don't know, man. To me, this looks like political suicide. I could be wrong, and we'll see. But within the conservative movement, I don't think we're here. I really don't. And that kind of leads me to impeachment, where you see that borne out. I did a show on Wednesday about this, kind of laying out my thoughts on impeachment in the case that Democrats brought up. Obviously, impeachment occurred within the House, but then there was a vote for conviction, which did not go through on the Senate side, and that's what just occurred, and we have to talk about. But there was essentially the trial that took place. The constitutionality was in question, and it was brought forward. And as everybody knows, Trump was acquitted in this because you only had 7 senators vote for guilty, and you need more than just a majority. You need 2/3. So they would have needed 17. They didn't get that, and so you did not have the Republican senators necessary to convict Trump. I'm frankly shocked that they got as many as they did. And I kind of outlined that on Wednesday as I talked about just how difficult it was going to be to get this charge to stick, because they were going for inciting an insurrection. And that's just difficult, because at what point has incitement occurred? How do you define as an insurrection, right? And I got into the fact that the people who did the things that they did at the Capitol riot are facing their own penalties. Over 200 different convictions. They're responsible for their own actions. So there is punitive actions occurring. When we look at Trump, we're just looking at his speech, right, that led up to this. And did he tell them specifically to do this? And so that's really was the question. And they got pretty close, but ultimately he's acquitted. And I think it speaks to 2 things. One, the support that Trump still has in the Republican Party, still very strong in the conservative movement. But then 2, just the difficulty of this charge, right? And the legality of it. So it doesn't honestly shock me that we got here. And it does mean that Trump is going to be around, I think, for years to come. And that the Trump movement lives, specifically what his appeal and the potential of running again. So, I mean, we could see Nikki Haley running against, Trump, or you could see Mike Pence in there. Like, who knows? But let me ask you, Chris, did it surprise you that this was the outcome of the impeachment trial? No?
Yeah. I mean, when you have a jury that is made up of people who are biased in favor of the accused, and in many cases who helped commit the crime, that's not a surprising outcome. I do think that the Democrats once again erred in making the charges so narrow and focusing on, as you say, the incitement charge, when really this was a months long campaign by Trump that started even before the election happened to steal it and to implement what would have been, if it had succeeded, a fascist coup. So I think focusing so much on the incitement charge gave the Republicans a little bit of wiggle room to help him weasel out of it. I do still put most of the accountability and the responsibility and the blame on the Republican Party for not voting to convict. I think Mitch McConnell's excuse-laden speech afterwards, where he really hammered Trump and bashed Trump and talked about what a horrible thing it was that he did, but still said, well, I'm not going to vote to convict because you can't convict a former president, which is a rule he just made up. I thought that was just completely ridiculous. The question with impeachment should not be one of basic illegality or criminal offense. Impeachment is about holding the most powerful man in the world accountable. And impeachment, aside from the ballot box, impeachment is really the only way to do that, especially if you buy into the logic of the Department of Justice, which since Nixon has argued that you can't criminally charge a president. And so the question shouldn't have been, does this meet the legal requirement for incitement, which personally I think it may have. The question should have been, is this acceptable conduct from a leader, from the leader of our country, from the most powerful man in the world, from the man who represents our nation to the rest of the world? And if it is not, should it be punished in some way? And I think both of the answers to both of those questions are obvious yeses. And Mitch McConnell seemed to agree up until the point where he said, I'm not going to vote to convict on this technicality.
When I think about what occurred at the Capitol, to me, it is the outcome of a people who are enraged and who see no possible venue for the system to work in their favor. And when I look at the system itself, is we use these broad terms of, it's the swamp, it's the deep state, it's, bureaucracy. And I do believe there's some truth to that, because there's so many aspects of federal government that are just massive and enormous and seem very insensitive to the will of the people and their needs. But at the same time, there are procedures in place and ways to correct them short of this type of violence. And I always talk about the judges in the Supreme Court. And I think a lot of blame should be focused there. If you're upset that the Supreme Court did not hear this case, then you can voice that, and say, hey, they should have heard this. They should have given this more time. You can get upset at the lawyers, I think on both sides, but especially the Trump side. There's many different instances where they brought up their case and it was scrambled and thrown together and it wasn't very convincing. And the fact that there was so many different places where the election was not really that close, right? If it had just been one state or maybe two, it would have been a more focused conversation. But there was numerous states that Trump was trying to make the argument for at the same time. That's a lot. It's very different than 2000. But there are ways to be able to affect change in government through the process to be able to counter election fraud. And that's not something that would have changed the outcome of this election, but there are ways to do that and to voice your frustration. And again, Trump able to run, or someone like him in 2024, is a great way to make your voice heard. The notion that you have to resort to this violence, I think, is absolutely unacceptable, and it's not the way. And it was people getting carried away. Trump, in many ways, would frame things that way. He would frame things as, hey, I'm, the only one that cares about you, and everybody else doesn't. And that's a gross oversimplification. But that being said, to get to the point where he willed this, he incited this, he directed this, is very difficult when you look at how he chose his words. And he said, hey, we're going to fight. But what does that mean? In political terminology, they can say, oh, that means doing what I was doing, which was trying to take on the media, trying to take on the Democratic Party, trying to fight in the sense of getting my values out there, my belief systems. That type of terminology is so common now, unfortunately, in politics, that it's really not that much of an outlier. And then at the same time, that these people were not under any formal direct orders. This isn't the same thing as him telling the National Guard or the Joint Chiefs of Staff to go set up a barricade, right? These people were doing this of their own choice to follow his political wishes or his speech or the framework that he was offering, right? There has to ultimately, that responsibility has to lie on these people, because this wasn't their formal job. This wasn't their formal tasking or purpose, you know, in life. This was something that this is a movement that they belonged to of their own will, for which they were not paid, and ultimately made their own choices to continue in. And so many people didn't, you know, didn't continue on to the Capitol, or didn't, you know, break things or hurt people. But the ones that did, I'm all for, you know, for punishment for them. It's just tricky to be able to peg Trump as the one who's ultimately responsible for all of that, to the point that conviction happens. So fascinating stuff. Absolutely.
I do think, if I could just,
Sure.
I do think that they should be held responsible for their own actions. I don't think they really have any good excuses. The system is overwhelmingly stacked in the favor of Trump supporters, which is how he won in 2016, despite losing the popular vote by a whole lot, and why he came close to winning this time. And the people who were at this riot, for the most part, they were not disempowered. They were not the poor. Many of them are CEOs, business owners. One woman took a private jet to get there. But as far as Trump's legal responsibility, I know I said a few weeks ago on the show that I thought a legal case for incitement, a criminal case, would be very weak. I think I've kind of changed my opinion on that based on your comments on the last show about the Brandenburg test for incitement. We had talked about the fact that there was no explicit call to violence, where Trump did not tell them go and attack people or invade the Capitol. However, that's not the standard. The standard, as you pointed out on Wednesday's show, which was great, by the way, is that incitement has to be intended and likely to cause imminent lawless violence. And I think the second part of that standard is obviously met by Trump's rhetoric in his speech on January 6th. It was likely to cause imminent lawless violence, and it did. I think the problem would be proving intent, especially with
Exactly.
people like Trump. Proving intent crimes is very, very difficult. With people who don't act like normal human beings, it's really hard to say, this is what they wanted. However, I think the extreme likelihood of the violence that day really stacks the case against him because, I knew that there was going to be violence on January 6th, and I don't have daily intelligence briefings where I have people telling me about upcoming threats. I knew it just because I was following the chatter on Twitter and hearing about things from Parler, and hearing this baseline of people who were planning violence. I think it's impossible to believe that Trump didn't also know about that. I also think that if you are, an analogy I've been thinking of is, if someone is standing in front of a lynch mob and they have gathered together to go attack someone, and you tell them, you point at the target and you say, look at all the horrible things that guy did to you. Look what he's taken away from you. And you continue to tell lies about that target. You are whipping those people up into a frenzy. And I think an incitement charge would be totally appropriate in a case like that. That is essentially what Trump did.
Which
So
is
I do think that a criminal incitement charge could be brought. I think it would still be very hard to convict, but it could easily be brought.
well, and to what extent, right? Is you had people who were trying to plant pipe bombs at the
Mhm.
Republican National, Convention headquarters, committee's headquarters. You had people that were, attacking police officers. Is that what Trump wanted them to do, or did he just want them to break a barricade? Right? It gets very, very tricky with this. But ultimately, it's this sense of, as a political leader, where is a line in terms of your control over people? And our country is one that believes in individualism and equality before the law and personal responsibility. And I think that's what it comes down to is, if these had been employees from the Trump business organization, if they had been federal employees by and large who had gathered, if it's a union leader telling the members of the union, you've got something different than what you had, which is this loose organization of people who apparently have, are able to get off work or have time, who are able to make this trip. There's the formal organization amongst them is very loose, right? And that makes it difficult. And then, of course, yeah, like the words, is he saying, go kill Mike Pence? Not exactly. He's saying, I hope he doesn't let us down. And he is, right? It's not quite that level of direct, specific order. So, again, I think I'm surprised that they got as many votes as they did. The question, and kind of the last one I'll leave you with today, is, as a liberal, are you nervous that Trump is going to come back? I mean, you've got there's an election in just 2 years, where the House could be in play, And then just a couple years after that, you've got another presidential election, and Trump has already tweeted and said things, not tweeted, and he's lost that, but he said things about, 2024, and then he's not going away. Does that make you nervous, or do you as a Democrat believe that Trump is out and that his movement will never, challenge Democrats again? What do you think?
He looks very weak right now, and I have to say the Republican Party as a whole looks very weak and divided right now. I am happy to see that he received more votes from his own party for conviction than any previous president who was ever impeached. That is something I have to give those seven Republican senators a lot of credit for. However, I didn't think he could win in 2016. I thought it was impossible. I thought the demographic makeup of the country would make that impossible. So I'm not going to get ahead of myself again and set myself up for failure. I was also very cautiously optimistic in the lead up to the 2020 election, if you remember. I didn't want to make any bold declarative statements that Trump had no chance of winning, even though he was down in the polls and running a really terrible campaign. So I'm a little nervous. I'm always a little nervous as a liberal Democrat.
Yeah.
We're always a little nervous, Wes.
Well, I think there's reason for that because, again, it touched a nerve. I think that the further we get from the Capitol riots, the more that Republicans are going to remember the things that the Trump administration brought them. And ultimately, what they see is success. They see the fact that he won that term and that in many ways he brought things to them that they had not gotten in previous presidents or candidates. They so many times Republicans think that they've got their person, and then you have someone who wasn't a true believer or didn't actually appeal to the interests they said they were. I mean, again, look at Nikki Haley and where she's at, right? Is that so apparently all along, she was thinking that we shouldn't be following Trump, and now she voiced that. But there were plenty of times where she was voicing the opposite. I think of Mitt Romney, who voted to convict. This was a guy who was sitting with Trump having dinner, trying to get into the administration at one point. So it's very hard to see where people stand. And again, the big benefit of Trump is that he governed the way that he ran as a candidate. So it was a clear choice. You either like it or you don't, but you get what what you pay for. And I think that's going to stick around. And it's not just Trump himself. Again, there are his children. There are people that were close to him, his administration, so many different people that he brought in that will be here. Even if they had voted to convict Trump, the movement itself is going to be around for a long time. The same way that Bernie Sanders, his movement to bring socialism to the mainstream is working. I mean, and it's not just him. He's got AOC, right? He's got, numerous other folks who are part of that movement and are finding places in the Biden administration. The question is, does Biden govern from the far left the way that Trump warned he would and incite, this movement to come back in force? Or does he strike a more moderate stance and bring conservatives and Republicans in to be able to unify the way he at times has said? And we'll have to get into that next time. So that'll be fun. We'll have Kyle back and we'll start getting into the Biden administration, the executive orders, and looking at the decisions that he is making and what you think of that. So that'll be next time. We are going to take a break from Conservatism on Tap tonight just because of Valentine's Day and giving the guys time to be with their significant others. I hope you have a wonderful night, Chris. And I hope that we all hope that Kyle gets better soon. So be thinking of him. Feel free to send him a message if you like. And don't forget to follow us on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. TheBurkingConservative.com is our website. Always a pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much for being on the show for this great discussion. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you. A pleasure as always. And we'll continue pulling for Kyle and hoping he's back with us next week.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week.